And I'm happy to be, well, here in my home office with you virtually and to present this work. You can see on the top of this slide here, our work is, this project has its feet in 3 different research centers at Syracuse University. And also I want to be sure to acknowledge our NIDA grant and support for this work. Now, how can I come on? Okay. I hope you all see a new slide now. This is very much a team effort, and here is a illustration of all the team members. But let me get right to the paper itself. What we're trying to accomplish in this paper is to determine the effects, the consequences of policy interventions that were enacted by states during the first year of COVID with respect to drug overdose mortality. So this falls under one of the headings that Jane Simone was talking about this morning in the first session. I think she used the term downstream consequences, or you could say unexpected consequences, unplanned consequences of an intervention. We're looking at 2 kinds of interventions. We're looking at interventions that were an attempt to control the spread and severity of the disease through various social distances and social interaction restrictions. And a second set of interventions that provided economic support, primarily of 2 forms, either cash payments through like the extra unemployment benefits that went out, or debt relief, notably in the form of moratoria on foreclosures and evictions. The data used in this study mainly comes from 2 sources. Our outcomes, the drug overdose mortality, is first built on counts of drug poisoning deaths from restricted access version of CDC vital records files. And using those, I should say Shannon, counted the number of drug poisoning deaths by county, by month, by sex over this 24-month period. And in order to have a true mortality rate or an exposure variable, we use the CDC's bridged race files to interpolate mid-period, which is in this case mid-month county level population, also by sex. I should also be sure to say we're looking at a single aggregate age group, working age adults 25 through 64. Now, the policy interventions that we're looking at, we took from the Oxford Government Response Tracker project. They have compiled numerical indices of the strength or severity, robustness, if you will, of these 2 kinds of interventions. What we're calling this, what they call a stringency index, reflects 8 underlying dimensions of restrictions on social interactions or movement, or retail activity, business activity, so on. We've got a 0 to 100 valued index that we divided by 10 just to make it more manageable. They produce their numbers on a daily basis, and we created monthly averages by state. And the economic support index is the same kind of deal, 0 to 100 scale, we divided by 10. And as I said before, it reflects the cash payments and debt relief. we used a 1-month lag for our multivariate analysis, linking the overdose rates, overdose counts to policy interventions. The approach we're using, it's basically a variation on interrupted time series, because starting in March of 2020, the entire country made a transition from a pre-pandemic to a pandemic era. So the most plausible design with respect to this observational study is one in which each unit studied serves as its own control. So the pre-pandemic patterns and trends for us, each county, served as the control or the counterfactual for what would have happened during the pandemic in the absence of the pandemic. The interrupted time series design is as I think most of you will find familiar, is subject to what they call the history threat, which is to say that things that happen during the period of intervention, things that may appear to be the consequence of the intervention, could be the consequence of something else that happened at the same time. So we need to somehow protect ourselves from this history bias. And the way we're attempting to do that is to adopt a two-stage estimation procedure that has recently emerged in the econometrics world. Basically, stage one estimates the pre-treatment trend for all units, and then extrapolates that pre-treatment trend into the treatment period. And those extrapolated values serve as the counterfactuals for what actually is seen during the treated period. That's what happens in step two. In the second stage of our two-stage estimator, we basically regress the pandemic era drug counts on the counterfactual, the calculated counterfactuals, plus month dummies, and an additional covariate and measure of the severity of COVID, which reflected local, i.e. county level death counts for each county and the counties in the immediate vicinity. So that's the statistical setup, the modeling setup. Here's a picture of basically what we're trying to analyze. This is aggregated at the whole country level, so it's a high level of aggregation. The blue part of this figure represents the case for adult men, and for red, it's adult women. The dots for men and the triangles for women represent observed experience, actual experience. And the solid line is the pre-pandemic trend, and the dashed line is the extrapolated trend into the pandemic era. And so there's a number of interesting things that you see in this picture. First of all, there's an upward trend in drug overdose deaths for both men and women. It's slightly steeper for men than women. They're both rather shallow upward slopes, but it's definitely steeper for the men and for the women. During the pre-pandemic era, the month-to-month variation in overdose deaths is very close to the trend line. It's very tightly bunched around that line. And then March 2020, COVID happens, and there's this huge jump, especially for men, in month-to-month overdose rates. Interestingly enough, for both men and women, the early pandemic spike in overdose mortality dissipates, and both time series more or less revert to the pre-pandemic trend extrapolated out into the pandemic era. So basically what we're trying to do is see to what extent variations in state-level COVID-related policy interventions are associated with those departures from trend that we see in this picture. So I've described this two-stage estimator and going direct to the result. This table shows you results from 4 different models. Model 1 looks at only the activity limitation policy. Model 2 looks at only the economic support policies. And the reason for showing those is for purposes of comparison. Several studies in the existing literature look at only one or the other by itself. We thought it was important to look at both. So model 3, which is highlighted in pale color there, is our preferred baseline model. So going back, the stringency index SI by itself appears to be detrimental. It raises drug overdose rates for both men and women. Actually slightly larger for women than men, but remember it's from a lower base for women than men. Both of those are statistically significant. This model 2, which looks at only the economic support intervention, we don't really see anything there. But when you put both indices in the same model, you see that the stringency index, the social activity restrictions, have a distinct positive association with drug overdose mortality. Whereas the economic support interventions have a countervailing effect of reducing drug overdose mortality. Model 4 is there just as a sensitivity test. I mentioned that we are controlling for county level severity of COVID measured by the COVID death rate in a county and its neighboring counties. That could be a channel through which these policy interventions operate, and to make that go away, if that's a problem, we remove that from the model, and as you can see, it has almost literally no effect on the results. So, I mean, the bottom line here is it looks like the social interaction restrictions are harmful with respect to drug overdoses. However much good they did with respect to mitigation of the disease, they had this unanticipated, unpleasant consequence of raising drug overdose mortality, but it was counteracted to some extent by the economic support. Well, we wanted to further investigate the possible counterfactuals here, and so we simulated basically 4 different scenarios based upon identifying patterns of being either high or low with respect to the SI index, or high or low with respect to the economic support index. We found 4 states that embodied the 4 combinations of these, either high on SI and low on ESI, or vice versa, and so on. And what we did was we calculated what national overdose counts would have been if every state pursued the same policy trajectories as these 4 exemplar states. And what you can see is that 2 of the 4 scenarios indicate that drug overdoses could have been reduced from what they were if states had adopted different policies, especially in particular if they were didn't do much on the way of social interaction, but did a lot with respect to economic support, or didn't do much with respect to social interaction, but did not so much with economic support. That's still beneficial. The high on both counts basically gets you to the same place that we actually were in 2020. And finally, if you did lots of social interaction restriction, but not much economic support, there would have been a lot more drug overdose deaths than we actually saw. Here's the same thing by month. And the reason I'm showing you this is because our simulations followed the month by month pattern of these 4 exemplar states. And, you know, the biggest action really was early on, just as the biggest action with respect to overdoses was, the biggest action with respect to policy intervention was. So the greatest potential for counterfactual variation followed that same temporal pattern. So what have we done? We believe we have pretty convincing evidence that the state policies aimed at controlling and mitigating the spread of COVID had additional consequences outside the realm of COVID disease and mortality itself, in particular with respect to drug overdoses. And even though the two policies worked in opposition to each other, none of the states adopted a combination of social interaction restrictions and economic support that would have predicted a reduction in drug overdoses. They all of the observed combinations were such that they predict an increase in drug overdoses. And I guess I would stop by just reminding us of, I think the obvious message here is that policy planners need to think broadly about the consequences beyond the target of interventions they contemplate with respect to the very important, undeniably crucial activity of controlling disease. And contact us, by which I mean contact the PI. So thank you.